We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Aleph in Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 10a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the similarities between Get Isha and Shtar Shichur, and one of those similarities was that if they're made in the Erchos, if they're made in the non-Jewish courts, so they're not going to be acceptable. And the Gemara had said that really we're only listing things that are apostle on a Midorabanan level. We're not listing things that are apostle on a Midoraisa level. And so the Gemara said, but isn't this a Doraisa? Isn't the fact that it's signed by non-Jews, isn't that a Psul Midoraisa? And the Gemara had suggested that maybe the Braisa was following the opinion of the Tanakama, and the Tanakama holds like Rebbe Lazar that Edim Mesira Karti, and really there were Edim Mesira there, and the whole psul is only a psul midrabanan. If it's signed by non-Jews, it's like mezuyif mitocho, and therefore would be puzzle. But the Gemara said, how could you say that? The Mishnah later on, the Mishnah is actually on the following Amud, and the next Amud, the Mishnah brings the sheet of Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon says that if it's made in the Erchos, or if it's signed by non-Jews rather, if it's signed by non-Jews, he says it is kosher, and the Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Shimon is following the opinion of Rebbe Lazar that Edim Mesira Karti, and so doesn't that imply that the Tanakama is not following Rebbe Lazar? It's not Edim Mesira, and we're back to our question. It seems to be that this is a psul doraisa, and if we're listing similarities between Get Isha and Shtar Shichur that are psulim midoraisa, so there are other ones that we could have listed. That was the question on the previous Amud. And so the Gemara answers, actually, that's not what's going on over here. Ika beinayu shemus muvhakin. The real difference is, let's say you have a name that it's clear that it's a non-Jewish name. In other words, really everybody agrees like Rebbe Lazar. Both the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon, they agree like Rebbe Lazar, Edim Mesira Karti, and we're talking over here about a psul that's only a derabanan. The whole machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon is if you're talking about a situation where the name of the non-Jew, it's clear that it's a non-Jewish name, so then there might be less of a concern, according to Rabbi Shimon. Rashi explains, Ika beinayu shemus muvhakin kolomar Tanakama b'shitase de Rebbe Lazar koi. Tanakama, just like Rabbi Shimon, is following Rebbe Lazar. And midrabanan hu depasle. It's just a psul midrabanan when you draw up this Get Isha in the Erchos, in the non-Jewish courts. Dil ma'asi lemismach hachasumin. What's the derabanan? The derabanan psul is maybe you'll end up relying on these signatures for other stars where you're not allowed to rely on them because they're non-Jewish signatures. Well, the most b'fneim, and then maybe you'll rely on them even further, and you'll actually give over the get in front of these people. Again, you're relying on these signatures. It's a psul midrabanan. V'yasser Rabbi Shimon l'meimer, and Rabbi Shimon is coming to say, Im shemus muvhakim de'ovdei kochavim hein, that no, in a situation where it's obvious that these are non-Jewish signatures because it's a non-Jewish name, she'ein Yisrael nikroin ba'osan shemus, where there are no Jews that go by these names, lav hainu mezuyif mitocho. So he says in that case that's not called mezuyif mitocho. It's not pasul midrabanan. The mod Rebbe Lazar to kuli alma yodi de'ovdei kochavim hein. There Rebbe Lazar would agree. Everybody knows it's a non-Jewish name. V'lo asi lemismach alaya below Edim Mesira. You're not going to come in and rely on these signatures without Edim Mesira. And so the point over here is that according to Rabbi Shimon, when you have Shemus Muvhakin, we do not say that it's pasul midrabanan. However, the Tanakama says it's a psul midrabanan in a situation, even in a situation where Shemus Muvhakim, again, we say it's considered mezuyif mitocho, even though you might have Edim Mesira, we follow Rebbe Lazar, and on a doraisa level it's okay, but again, this is a psul midrabanan. But the Gemara continues, v'chazara doraisa. But one of the items that we listed as a similarity between Get Isha and Shtar Shichur was chazara, was the idea of retraction. Rashi over here says, chazara, rotza lachzor b'shneim, l'Ravi Meir, psula doraisa. According to Ravi Meir, again, if the person wants to retract, the case over there was that the person wanted to retract, that also is dealing with an issue that is a psul midoraisa, da'kevan debatal mishalech l'shlichusa d'shliach, because since we're talking about a situation where the mishalech said he no longer wants the shlichus, he wants to retract, nimsa she'eno shluchu, he's taking back the shlichus, the person is not a shliach, ve'in kan gerish and klal, there's no divorce here at all, that's a doraisa issue, that we're saying that retraction is not possible, that we're saying rather retraction is possible. V'hainu doraisa derachman amar v'nasan biyada v'zelo nasan lohu v'lo shlucho, here, where he retracted, so it's not going to work, the get is not going to be effective, and again, that's a doraisa, similarity. So you see, we are listing cases that are doraisa. The katani, that one is listed. So the Gemara says, Ella rather, ki katani milsa, the lesser be kedushin. Rather, forget about what we said about doraisa and derabanan. When we're listing over here similarities between Get Isha and Shtar Shichur, it could be we're listing some things that are doraisa, it could be we're listing some things that are derabanan, but the key point is we're only listing things that don't exist by kedushin as well. Milsa de isa be kedushin lo katani. Anything that also, any halacha that also exists by kedushin, that we're not listing, and that's why we don't list a bunch bunch of the other examples that were brought in the previous Amud because they exist by Kiddushin. But the Gemara says, V'chazara gufa isa b'kiddushin. But chazara also is something that exists by Kiddushin. There's a concept of retracting if it hasn't yet reached the woman. And the Gemara says, well, it doesn't exist exactly in the same fashion. But shlichus bal karcha, we're talking about a situation where it's shlichus against the recipient's will. The v'gerish and isa, by gerishin, you can actually divorce a woman against her will. And the same thing by freeing a slave. Over Kiddushin lessa, by Kiddushin, that's not true. The marriage can only happen willingly, meaning that the wife was willing. And so therefore you don't have a similar situation fully in terms of a Kiddushin Bal Karcha, in terms of that halacha of retraction. And Rashi explains, b'shlichus bal karcha, we're talking about shlichus when it's against her will. Kolomar dumya de gittin lo mashkachas la b'kiddushin. The point over here, the Gemara is that you don't find a case by kiddushin that's similar to the case that we have by gittin. The shliach zeh mishtalech etzlo legarsha bal karcha. Because when we're talking about gerishin, we're talking about the shliach going to divorce her against her will. V'chein la'evid l'shachro al karcha. Also by the evid, the shliach is going to free him against his will, and that's where we're talking about this halacha of retraction. Aval b'kiddushin lo haya nasa shliach etzlo al karcha. But when it comes to Kiddushin, it's impossible for him to be a shliach against her will. Hilka chachi katani bazu shavu gitei nashim v'shechrei avadim. And so therefore what it means is as follows: gitei nashim and shechrei avadim are similar. Sheshliach zeh nasa shliach etzlan al karchan, where you have a case where a shliach is going to either divorce the woman or free the slave against his will. V'imratza habal chozer, and if the husband wants, in such a case, the husband can retract or the master can retract. Masha ein kein b'kiddushin. Now that's not true by kiddushin. The avagav the chozer. Now even though retraction is possible by Kiddushin, but lo dumya dahanihu. But the case is not similar to the case by Gittin and the case by Shechuru Avadim. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kol get sheyesh olav eid kusi pasel, any document that has a witness that's a kusi. Kusi is a Samaritan that's signed on and it's puzzle. Chutz me gitei nashim v'shechrei avadim, except for gitei nashim and shechrei avadim. If you have a gerisha, if you have a shtar shechur, and a kusi is signed on and it's going to be kosher. Ma'asav shehiviu lefnei Rabbi Gamliel lekfar usnoi gerisha vayu eidav eidei kusim v'hechshe. There was an incident where they brought before Rabbi Gamliel in kfar usnoi a gerisha that had the witnesses were kusim, and he said that it was kosher. And Rashi explains eid kusi pasal de chashidia eidus sheker. The reason why eid kusi is pasal is because he's suspect on false testimony. Chutz mi gitei nashim kedim mefarish beGemara. The Gemara will explain why gitei nashim is an exception. Lechfar usnoi to kfar usnoi, and the Mesoras Hashas adds to that Rashi besvar macherim nosaf makom, means to say that kfar usnoi is the name of a place. And the Gemara says Moni Mas Nisan, who's the author of our Mishnah, lo Tanakama v'lo Rebbe Lozer v'lo Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The author of our Mishnah is not the Tanakama, it's not Rebbe Lozer, and it's not Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, as follows. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, matzahs kusi muteris. If you have the matzah of a kusi that is mutter, v'yadam yotzei bo yidei chovas v'pesach, and a person can fulfill his obligation with a matzah of a kusi on Pesach. Rabbi Lozer Oser, Rabbi Lozer says it's forbidden, l'fisha ein bekiyin b'dikdukei mitzvahs, because the kusim are not careful when it comes to the specifics of mitzvahs, and therefore Rabbi Lozer says you have a concern over here that the matzah might be chametz. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says kol mitzvah shecheziku b'kusim harbe medachtekin bo yosem Yisrael. Any mitzvah that the kusim take upon themselves, they're actually more careful in that mitzvah than a traditional Yisrael. And the Gemara says money. So who's the author of our Mishnah? Tanakama, if you're going to say the author of our Mishnah is the Tanakama, afilu shar shtaros nami. So according to the Tanakama, so all shtaros should be good with a kusi, just like we say the matzah of a kusi is fine. And he Rebbe Lozer, if you're going to say our Mishnah follows Rebbe Lozer, afilu gerisha nami lo, even a gerisha should not be good, because Rebbe Lozer says they're not careful in mitzvahs. You have a concern that the matzah is actually chametz, and you should have a concern by gerisha as well. V'yi Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and if you're going to say that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, so then it should depend. Ida achzak, if it's something that there's a presumption that they keep that particular mitzvah, so afilu shar shtaros nami, that should be true by other shtaros also. If they keep the mitzvahs related to the shar shtaros, they should be believed. And ida lo achzak, and if there's no presumption that they're trustworthy when it comes to shtaros, so afilu gerisha nami lo, so even by gerisha they should not be considered trustworthy, and it should not be a good document. V'chiteim, and if you're going to say Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel here that our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, with the achzik b'ha v'lo achzik b'han, you'll simply say that there's a chazaka that they're good when it comes to gerisha, but there's no chazaka when it comes to other documents. But if so, ma'ir yachad, so then why say there's just one kusi? It says in our Mishnah that the case is the get has kol get sheyeshel of 8 kusi in singular, that there's 1 8 upon it. Why are you talking about 1? Afilu trei nami, even 2 should also be okay, because again there's a chazaka that they can be relied on. Allah Amar Rebbe Lozer, so why did Rebbe Lozer say lo hechshiru bo ela 8 echad kusi bilvad, that even when we say by getish it's kosher, it's only good with 1 8 kusi on the get? And so the Gemara says, Liolam Rebbe Lozer. Really, our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rebbe Lozer, meaning to say that the kusi is really not trustworthy. And so if that's the case, why is it kosher by Gerisha? We could go into Chasim Yisrael Levasof. The case over here is that the bottom signature is the signature of a Yisrael, it's the signature of a Jew, and the Yisrael would not have signed unless he knew that the person signed above him was reliable, and that's why in the case of Gerisha, we rely on the Eid Kusi. And Rashi explains, Matzah's Kusi Muteres, the matzah of a Kusi is mutter, bepesach la'achila v'lo chayshin and shemech mitzvah. We're not concerned that it's chametz, that's according again to the Tanakama, and furthermore the Tanakama says, V'yadam yotze bo yidei chovasu bepesach mishum chovas laila harishon, shu chayiv lechol matzah ha'mishtameres k'dichsiv ba'erev tochlu matzos. There's a special mitzvah on the first night of Pesach to eat matzah ha'mishtameres, to eat shmur matzah, v'afilu yadinan bada loech mitzvah, even if we know that it's not chametz, lo nofik ba'alim kein avad lo shimur l'shem chovas matzah. You can't be yotze unless it was shmura, meaning unless you guarded it for the sake of the obligation of the mitzvah of matzah. The chsiv u'shmartem es hamatzos, like the pasuk says, u'shmartem es hamatzos, v'kusim b'kiyin hein shetzrichu l'ishtamer l'shma v'yosin l'shimur. The Tanakam is saying the kusim understand the halacha, they know that it needs to be guarded for the sake of the mitzvah, and therefore it's going to be good even for the first night. Rabbi Lozer oser af b'achila kol yom osa pesach dechashtinan l'ushav v'mechamtzin. Rabbi Lozer says it's prohibited to have the matzah of a kusi the entire Pesach, because we have a concern maybe it's chametz. And then the last opinion called mitzvah shechziku bo v'akol shochtin mefarish to asi Rabbi Shimon lo Sofia Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon's coming along and he's adding to the Tanakama. He's saying we trust them even more. Af mitzvah shimi divrei sofrim, even if it's just a derabbanan. V'yein ksuva b'torah, it's not written in the Torah. Mechziku bo samchin and alayu. If there's a chazaka that they keep that mitzvah, so then we rely on them. And so then the Gemara said, Afilu shar shtaros nami dehalo chashidi. If we're talking about, according to Tanakama, that they're not suspect at all, so all shtaros should be good. And ida achzik behilchas gittin u'shtaros, who could go into achzik b'ha v'gittin v'shechrun v'lo achzik b'ha v'shar shtaros. Then the Gemara went and said, so if we're talking according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, so if there's a chazaka that they're reliable, so they should be reliable for everything. And if you're going to suggest that they're reliable just for gittin and shechrun, and they're not reliable when it comes to other shtaros, so ihachi, if so, ma'ir yadelo achshinan begittin ala chad kusi. Why is it only one kusi is kosher? Kenektani masnis an aid kusi, the chad kusi v'chad yisraelu the machshir aval tervaya kusim lo. The Mishnah sounds like one aid is a kusi and one aid is a yisrael, and only that is kosher. And Rashi continues. The Gemara answered, Liolam Rebbe Lozer damar chashidi. Really, our Mishnah follows Rebbe Lozer that the kusim are suspect. V'gitin my time hochsher aid kusi. And why is it that by a get isha the aid kusi is kosher? Could go into chosim yisrael aid hasheni levasof tachas kusi. Again, the case is that a yisrael, the second aid, he signed below the kusi, and that shows that this kusi is reliable. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Amud Beis.